Welcome back to the edge of the known universe. Tonight's story begins with a joke about coffee and ends with a station fighting to breathe. When a radiation storm tears through an alien classroom orbiting deep space, a visiting human scientist is forced to step into lethal vacuum to save those who once doubted her. Oxygen fails, shields collapse, trust fractures. Survival becomes a choice. Stay with us as curiosity turns into catastrophe, and resilience is tested in the cold between stars. The dome shattered before anyone finished laughing. A white fracture raced across the transparent ceiling. Then the world detonated inward. Desks ripped free, bodies lifted, air screamed into vacuum. "Doctor!" Maya Chen hit the deck hard as decompression tore instruments from their mounts and flung them like shrapnel. Red strobes pulsed through swirling debris. Professor Varn Seven's elongated silhouette flickered between gravity shifts as emergency shutters slammed halfway down, grinding against twisted frame. Luma's gelatinous form splashed against a wall panel, eye stalks wide with shock. Outside, a radiation storm bloomed like a silent supernova, devouring stars. Oxygen meters began their merciless descent. Helion's calm synthetic voice cut through chaos. Hull breach confirmed. Atmospheric loss critical. Survival window estimated at 6 hours. The lecture on digestion ended in the sound of dying air. Shock waves rippled through the station as the secondary seal failed. A concussive blast hurled Chen across the lab, her shoulder slamming into a console that sparked and died. Gravity flickered, cutting out, then napping back at half strength, pinning bodies awkwardly against fractured flooring. Varn 7 anchored himself to a wall conduit, tentacles lashing as he triggered internal bulkheads. One shutter jammed halfway, venting a thin, deadly stream of atmosphere into the void. Radiation alarms spiked into ultraviolet. Helion recalculated damage in real time, structural integrity at 60% and falling. Nyx clung to an overturned workstation, bioluminescent skin flashing erratic distress patterns. The room smelled of burnt circuitry and ionized metal. Chen forced herself upright, blood in her mouth, lungs straining against thinning air. Outside the dome, the storm intensified, claws of charged particles scraping at the station's weakening shield. Helion's voice steadied as the chaos narrowed into numbers. Oxygen reserves, 5 hours, 52 minutes. Carbon scrubbers offline in 3 sectors. Radiation shield integrity declining at 4% per minute. The classroom was no longer a place of learning. It was a sealed lung slowly collapsing. Chen staggered toward the central console, fingers moving before doubt could surface. She rerouted emergency power to atmospheric compressors, buying seconds, not safety. Varn 7 projected a holographic schematic above the wreckage. Maintenance ring exposed. External lattice failing. Luma pressed herself against the cracked viewport, watching stars blur behind radioactive haze. No evacuation pods responded to command. No rescue signal would outrun the storm. The station had become an island in lethal space. The countdown was no longer theoretical. It was breath measured in digits, and every inhalation cost something. Chen locked into the central console and pulled the failing schematics across her visor. Oxygen lattice fracture in the outer maintenance ring. Radiation interference corrupting automated repair drones. Manual override required. She calculated airflow displacement, remaining compressor output, metabolic consumption rates for 23 alien physiologies and 1 human. 5 hours. 40 minutes now. less if panic spiked respiration. Varn 7 transmitted station topology, while Helion flagged structural weak points in pulsing red. The external ring rotated through the storm every 90 seconds, exposing any repair team to lethal particle flux. No pods, no remote fix, no external rescue inside the radiation envelope. Chen ran probabilities twice. Staying inside guaranteed suffocation. Going out meant exposure and possible death. Survival narrowed to a corridor barely wider than courage. She exhaled slowly and began plotting the path. Whispers traveled faster than oxygen loss. Several students recoiled from the central chamber, bioluminescent skin flickering in agitation. A Class 5 Deathworld native proposing a radiation walk felt less like bravery and more like recklessness. Nix pulsed a warning through the local channel, questioning whether human physiology could destabilize under stress and endanger them all. Varn 7 hesitated, tentacles tightening around a fractured conduit, weighing logic against instinct. Chen sensed it. The doubt. Thin as the remaining air. She removed her helmet seal and spoke without raising her voice. Outlining exposure thresholds, suit tolerances, metabolic margins. Calm, clinical, not heroic. Luma drifted closer, eye stalks fixed on Chen with unwavering trust. The silence thickened. Trust was another resource. Dwindling. Outside. Radiation scraped against the shield like claws. Inside. The question hung heavier than gravity. Was the human their salvation or their liability? The numbers stopped being abstract. 5 hours. 21 minutes. Carbon levels climbing. Chen sealed her helmet and keyed the maintenance route into her wrist display. No vote was taken. Varn 7 studied her for a long second, then transferred command authorization to her suit. Airlock access granted. Helion synchronized internal pressure cycles with the ring's rotation window. 90 seconds of reduced particle density. Barely survivable. Luma transmitted a soft data pulse into Chen's comm. A simple phrase translated into human language. Come back. Chen acknowledged without promise. She moved through the fractured corridor toward the outer hatch, boots locking magnetically with each step as gravity flickered. Behind her, 23 lives waited for oxygen that no longer existed. The hatch iris began to open, revealing a corridor of radiation and spinning debris. Decision became motion. The airlock cycled open, and the corridor beyond looked less like architecture and more like a wound. Gravity pulsed erratically, slamming Chen sideways, then releasing her into weightless drift. Debris, shattered panels, snapped conduits, frozen droplets of atmosphere, hung suspended like a minefield. Radiation warnings flickered amber across her visor as the station rotated into the storm's fringe. She anchored her boots to the deck and advanced in controlled bursts. One magnetized step at a time, Helion fed her a countdown to the next particle surge. 90 seconds of relative calm, then lethal flux. A torn cable whipped past her helmet, snapping sparks into vacuum. The oxygen lattice junction loomed ahead, fractured and venting. Behind her, the airlock sealed with finality. There was no retreat corridor anymore, only forward into the dead zone. Chen reached the fractured oxygen junction and latched onto the housing as the station rolled beneath her. The panel was warped, bolts sheared, conduits hissing thin vapor into vacuum. Helion projected a repair schematic over her visor, but interference distorted half the feed. No time to wait for clarity. She ripped away the twisted casing and exposed the primary lattice node. fingers working inside a storm of static. Power fluctuated. She rerouted flow through a secondary compressor line, bridging circuits with a manual bypass cable from her suit. A surge rattled her arms to the bone. Oxygen readings ticked upward by fractions. Then gravity cut out completely, sending her drifting as the ring rotated toward the radiation front. She caught a railing with one gloved hand and forced the final connector into place. Partial atmosphere restored. The first surge hit like a silent tidal wave. Radiation levels spiked, turning her visor into a blizzard of warning glyphs. Chen flattened against the lattice housing as particle flux hammered the station's skin. Her suit's shielding thinned in visible increments. Heart rate elevated, 130, 140. Caffeine sharpened her focus, but drove her pulse higher. Adrenaline compounding the strain. Oxygen flow inside the dome climbed slowly, numbers stabilizing by degrees. Helion confirmed partial atmospheric recovery, buying them perhaps another hour. Not victory, delay. The storm roared invisibly around her, scraping against the weakened radiation shield. Luma's voice crackled through static, asking if she was intact. Chen answered with controlled breaths, refusing panic entry. Survival was rhythm. Inhale, adjust, endure. The pulse subsided, but the storm had not finished with them yet. Inside the central dome, the air stopped thinning. Carbon scrubbers hummed back to life. Uneven at first, then steady. Oxygen levels rose in fragile increments, enough for lungs to expand without burning. Students who had been clutching the floor released their grip, bioluminescent pulses shifting from panic to cautious relief. Varn 7 monitored the atmospheric curve with rigid focus. Unwilling to celebrate fractions, Helion confirmed the manual bypass was holding, for now. 5 hours had become 6. A reprieve measured in borrowed breath, through the fractured viewport. Chen's figure clung to the outer lattice like a solitary anchor against the storm. Luma watched the oxygen meter rather than the stars, counting every percentage as if willing it upward. Survival had returned, but only in pieces. The station was breathing again, yet the storm outside had not relented. Relief lasted 30 seconds. Then Helion's tone shifted, flattening into something colder than panic. Radiation shield integrity at 28% and falling. The earlier breach had destabilized the external array. The storm was now chewing directly at their last barrier. Without full shield alignment, lethal particle flux would penetrate the dome in under 9 minutes. Varn 7 pulled up the exterior grid and saw the failure cascade spreading like rot across metallic petals. The oxygen lattice fix had rerouted power, but at a cost. The shield matrix was starving. Inside, the students felt nothing yet, but their dosimeters began to blink. Outside, Chen saw the glow intensify along the hull, a corona of charged death wrapping the station. Survival had shifted targets. Air was no longer the problem. Time under radiation was. Chen pulled herself along the lattice toward the outer spine, where the radiation array unfolded like broken wings. Helion mapped the shortest path across the hull, each segment flashing exposure thresholds in harsh red. There was no internal access to the failing shield core. The damage sat fully outside, directly in the storm's path. Varn 7 transmitted authorization codes while rerouting minimal power to the array's manual actuators. Particle density surged again, forcing Chen to press flat against the hull as static crawled across her visor. Suit shielding dropped another 3%. The external maintenance hatch ahead was warped half open, leading to the control node embedded in the station's skin. She latched onto the rim and forced herself through, entering a chamber lit only by flickering emergency diodes and radiation glow. The explosion came without sound. A surge of charged particles struck the array, snapping the weakened support struts like brittle bone. The shockwave rippled through the hull and tore Chen's magnetic grip free. Her tether line whipped once, then sheared against a jagged edge. Suddenly, there was no up, no down, only stars spinning in violent arcs across her visor. The station drifted away, rotating through radiation haze, shrinking with terrifying calm. Warning icons flooded her display. Oxygen leak minimal. Propulsion reserves low. Shielding critical. She flailed once, instinctive and useless, body tumbling end over end. The storm surrounded her in luminous currents, silent and lethal. Helion's voice fought through static, tracking her trajectory, 90 meters from hull, increasing. Vacuum did not roar. It erased. Helion's estimate cut through static, 90 seconds before lethal radiation saturation. Chen forced her limbs inward, reducing spin, fighting the nausea rising behind her visor. The station rotated ahead, shield petals flickering like dying embers, oxygen steady for now. But suit shielding had fallen below critical threshold. Every second outside multiplied cellular damage. She triggered micro-thrusters in short bursts, conserving fuel, adjusting vector by degrees. The storm shimmered around her, charged particles streaking across her field of vision like burning rain. Heart rate 150, breath controlled, shallow. Inside the dome, dosimeters ticked upward, students watching her telemetry instead of the stars. 70 seconds, her trajectory still drifting wide. She recalculated angle against rotation velocity, eyes narrowing. There would be no second attempt. 40 seconds. Chen killed the spin completely and accepted the risk. She diverted power from secondary shielding into propulsion, sacrificing protection for thrust. The suit shuddered as radiation counters spiked, warning tones flattening into continuous alarm. She angled her body toward the rotating shield core and fired a sustained burn. The recoil slammed through her frame, vision tunneling as acceleration crushed against her ribs. The station swelled in her visor, fractured petals blazing against the storm. 20 seconds. She extended her arms, preparing for impact. Magnetic clamps deployed a fraction too late, scraping metal before locking hard. The jolt rattled her teeth. She hung there, anchored once more. Suit integrity nearly spent. Survival was no longer calculation. It was commitment beyond fear. The shield core lay exposed like a wound torn open to the storm. Panels hung loose, actuator arms frozen mid-deployment, radiation bleeding through the gaps in violent flares. Chen dragged herself along the array spine, gloves slipping against scorched alloy. Her suit readouts cascaded in crimson, shielding at 8%. Core temperature rising. The particle flux struck her back in relentless waves, each impact a silent hammer through composite armor. Inside the dome, dosimeters crossed into dangerous territory. Varn 7 watched the radiation curve climbing with terrifying speed. Chen reached the manual override column embedded beside the central hinge and forced the access plate open with a multi-tool. Sparks erupted as she bypassed the automated lockout. There would be no safe distance now, only proximity to lethal energy. Chen locked her boots into the hinge assembly and gripped the manual control lever with both hands. The actuator arm had seized under thermal stress. Automated systems were blind in the interference storm. She disengaged the fail-safe pins one by one, fingers numbing as radiation warnings climbed into constant tone. With a strained exhale, she hauled the lever downward. Metal groaned, resisting, then shifted a fraction. The shield pedal outside trembled, but did not align. She reset her stance, rerouted remaining suit power into servo assistance, and pulled again. A surge of radiation slammed through the housing, flashing her visor white. Heart rate spiked beyond 160. Muscles burned, tendons threatening to tear, slowly, painfully. The array arm began to rotate back into position against the storm. The final alignment locked with a metallic crack that vibrated through her bones. Chen slammed her palm onto the activation pad and forced the manual override sequence through corrupted circuits. For one suspended heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the shield array flared, petals unfolding in synchronized arcs as energy coursed along their edges. A lattice of blue light expanded outward, meeting the radiation storm in a blinding collision. Particle flux bent away from the dome, deflected in shimmering waves. Inside, dosimeter readings plateaued, then began to fall. Helion confirmed shield integrity climbing past 40%. Chen sagged against the control column, suit alarms fading into distant echoes. The storm still raged, but its claws no longer pierced the station's skin. Survival had been reassembled by hand. The shield stabilized, but Chen did not. The adrenaline drained from her bloodstream as abruptly as gravity returning to full strength. Her knees buckled against the hinge assembly, visor clouding with condensation and radiation haze. Suit diagnostics blinked in fading red. Structural integrity, critical. Neural feedback, delayed. Cellular exposure, severe. She tried to release the manual lock, but her fingers refused to obey. A tremor passed through her limbs, then another. Inside the dome, Varn 7 saw her telemetry flatten into dangerous irregularity. Luma pressed both eye stalks to the viewport as Chen's body slumped sideways. Magnetic clamps disengaging one at a time. She drifted slowly along the array spine, unconscious. Suit thrusters inactive. The storm light reflected off her visor as she began to slide toward open vacuum once more. Inside the dome, oxygen stabilized at breathable levels. Carbon scrubbers cycled clean. Radiation readings fell below lethal thresholds as the shield lattice held firm against the storm. Helion confirmed atmospheric pressure, nominal and structural integrity no longer degrading. Survival probability for the station climbed past 80%. Relief rippled through the chamber. Bioluminescent pulses shifting from fear to fragile hope. Yet one life remained outside the margin. Chen's telemetry flickered erratically, suit power nearly exhausted. Varn 7 deployed 2 external retrieval drones, magnetic grapples extending toward her drifting form. The drones locked onto her harness and began a careful pull toward the nearest airlock. Students watched in suspended silence as her vitals hovered on the edge. The station was breathing again. Now it waited to see if she would. The airlock sealed with a hollow thud as the drones hauled Chen inside. Pressure equalized in slow increments, frost evaporating from her visor. Medical subroutines activated automatically, flooding the chamber with sterile light. Varn 7 and 2 med units cut away sections of her scorched suit, revealing blistered skin beneath polymer layers. Her pulse fluttered irregularly, then steadied under assisted oxygen flow. Radiation counters ticked downward, but left permanent markers across cellular scans. Luma hovered near the chamber window, silent for once, watching the human who had stepped into a storm for them. After several endless minutes, Chen's eyelids trembled. She inhaled sharply, cough tearing through her chest, but she was breathing on her own. Survival had not come without cost. It had etched itself into her flesh. The storm moved on. as abruptly as it had arrived. Beyond the dome, space returned to indifferent black, stars steady, and cold inside. The station hummed with repaired systems and exhausted breath. No alarms, no flashing warnings, only the low vibration of life support cycling air through corridors that had nearly become tombs. Students drifted quietly between stations, movements slower, measured, as if sound itself might fracture the fragile calm. Varn 7 stood at the central console, reviewing damage reports in silence. Oxygen stable, shield integrity holding, casualties none. The word felt unreal. In the medical bay, Chen lay motionless beneath soft diagnostic light. Skin marked by radiation burns. The station had survived, but the cost lingered in the stillness. Silence was not peace. It was aftermath. Luma recorded the incident for the xenobiology archive, her voice steadier than she felt. She replayed Chen's telemetry, the spike in heart rate, the sacrifice of shielding for thrust. The moment the shield array reignited, humans did not run on rocket fuel. They ran on decision under pressure. Varn 7 reviewed the data beside her, analyzing tolerance curves and stress responses. But the numbers no longer felt abstract. The lesson had burned itself into their hull. Coffee had been a curiosity. Survival had been proof. Across the station, students studied the radiation scars etched into Chen's medical scans. Silent witnesses to choice. Luma paused the recording and stared at the viewport. Curiosity had opened the door. Courage had kept it from closing forever. When Chen finally stood unaided in the observation chamber, the station felt different, not safer, not stronger, aware. Varn 7 addressed the gathered students without ceremony. Resilience was not chemical tolerance, not evolutionary accident, not stimulant consumption. It was the willingness to step into lethal uncertainty for others. Luma watched Chen rest her hand against the viewport, gazing at the quiet stars that had nearly claimed her. The myth of rocket fuel had dissolved into something far more complex. Humans were not extraordinary because they consumed risk. They were extraordinary because they chose it when survival demanded sacrifice. The storm had revealed more than structural weakness. It had exposed character. The lesson would not remain confined to one station. It would travel, carried in data and memory, across the galaxy. The next lecture resumed beneath repaired shields, but no one mistook it for routine. Varn 7 projected the incident logs across the dome, not as spectacle, but as instruction. Atmospheric decline curves, radiation exposure graphs, decision timestamps, each moment dissected with clinical precision. Chen stood beside him, pale but upright, her presence a living annotation. Luma annotated the feed with cross-species comparisons, mapping stress thresholds and adaptive response windows. The data revealed no miracle spike, no impossible physiology, only calculated risk layered over determination. Survival, Varn 7 stated, was not the absence of fear, but disciplined action within it. The class recorded every word. The shield hummed quietly above them, a reminder that systems fail. What matters is who moves when they do. On a small console near the viewport sat a single synthesized mug, steam curling faintly into recycled air. No one laughed at it anymore. The dark liquid inside was no longer rumor or exaggeration, not rocket fuel, not myth. It had become a marker in the station's history. Luma studied it the way she once studied oxygen readouts, measuring meaning instead of chemistry. Chen lifted the mug, but did not drink immediately. She let the warmth settle into her palms, steady and grounding. Around them, the repaired lattice glowed faint blue against open space. Survival had demanded sacrifice, not caffeine. Yet the ritual remained, a quiet reminder that focus could be chosen before crisis struck. The mug was small, ordinary, and permanently transformed. The archive entry was labeled without drama, Incident 47A, Shield Failure Event. Yet within days it circulated beyond the station, transmitted through academic channels and exploratory fleets. Data packets carried telemetry, radiation curves, and Chen's final manual override sequence. Other sectors studied it not for spectacle, but for pattern, how a species conditioned by hostile environments navigated collapse. Luma added her own commentary to the record, describing the moment when doubt shifted to trust. Memory became more than documentation. It became instruction for future crises. Across distant classrooms, students would replay the footage of a human drifting in vacuum and choosing to return. The lesson would outlast the storm. Not about coffee, not about biology, about what survives when systems fail. The dome lights dimmed to lecture mode, softer now against reinforced glass. Outside, stars burned with their usual indifference. The radiation storm long dispersed. Professor Varn 7 resumed his position at the center platform, tentacles steady, voice calibrated, but carrying new weight. Today's topic: adaptive survival systems in multi-species environments. No one shifted restlessly. No laughter echoed when the word human appeared on the display. Chen sat among them rather than apart, her movements slower but deliberate. The repaired shield hummed faintly overhead, a constant reminder of fragility. Luma's eye stalks focused not on spectacle, but on data, disciplined and intent. The classroom felt larger, not in space, but in understanding. Knowledge had gained context. Survival had rewritten the curriculum. Luma raised one eye stalk, not with naive excitement, but measured intent. She projected comparative data across the dome. Oxygen tolerance curves, neural stress markers, decision latency intervals. Her voice remained calm as she connected them to Chen's telemetry from the storm. Humans were not extraordinary because they consumed stimulants, she explained, but because they trained their minds to act inside narrowing margins. Rituals like coffee were psychological calibrations, small daily rehearsals for larger crises. The class absorbed the analysis without mockery. Luma paused, glancing briefly at Chen, then added a final variable to the projection: trust under uncertainty. Survival outcomes improved when fear did not override cooperation. The insight settled heavier than any statistic. Curiosity had matured into comprehension. When the lecture ended, Chen remained by the viewport alone. The station was stable, the shield strong, the oxygen clean. Yet her hands still trembled faintly when she flexed them, nerves recovering from radiation's invisible burn. Medical scans projected months of treatment ahead, possible long-term cellular damage. Survival had preserved lives, but altered hers. Varn 7 joined her without words, observing the faint scars tracing along her skin. Outside, space offered no acknowledgement of sacrifice. It never did. Chen lifted the cooled mug from the console, taking a slow sip, not for energy, but for grounding. The taste was bitter, steady, real. The storm had passed, but its mark remained in flesh and memory. Survival had a cost, and she carried it willingly. In the end, the storm was not the greatest threat. Fear was. This story reminds us that survival is not about strength alone, but about the decisions we make when systems fail and time runs out. Sometimes the smallest ritual becomes a symbol of focus, courage, and responsibility. If this journey among the stars moved you, follow the channel for more cinematic sci-fi survival stories, where every breath matters and every choice has a cost.